Before dawn on July 10, 1945, Argentine fishermen off Mar del Plata watched a large submarine slide out of the mist, with its lights dark and its hull streaked with rust. 2 months after Hitler died, a Nazi submarine had surfaced off Argentina, and her crew would not say why. They carried no papers, the logbook was gone, and their young commander could not explain where the boat had been. To understand what surfaced that morning, you have to understand what U-530 was built to do. She was a type IG-40, one of the largest and longest-range submarines Germany ever put to sea, laid down at the Deutsche Werft in Hamburg in 1941 and commissioned the following year. She stretched more than 250 feet, carried 6 torpedo tubes, and could cross oceans alone. Her class had a range of over 13,000 nautical miles, and with a snorkel, she could run submerged for days, drawing air through a single tube while her diesels pushed her forward beneath the waves. She was a machine designed to disappear into the Atlantic and not come back until her work was finished. That detail matters because in the summer of 1945, U-530 would perform exactly that kind of vanishing act, long after there was any war left to fight. The man giving the orders was almost the opposite of what that boat represented. Oberleutnant zur See Otto Vermuth took command of U-530 in January 1945. He was, by most accounts, just 24 or 25 years old, and this was his first real command, handed to him at the single worst moment in the entire U-boat war. By then, the Atlantic had become a killing field. Allied aircraft, escort groups, and broken German codes had turned the hunters into the hunted. Of the roughly 40,000 men who served in U-boats, tens of thousands never came home. Under her earlier captain, U-530 had built a genuine combat record. 7 patrols, 2 Allied ships sunk, a 3rd damaged. She was a capable boat with an inexperienced commander. And what he did next has never been fully explained. Wormuth's final patrol sent him back across the Atlantic toward the American coast, the same waters where U-boats had once terrorized convoys. By early May 1945, he was operating off New York. And there, according to interrogation records, his crew fired on Allied shipping and hit nothing. The targets missed, the weapons failed, or the escorts spoiled every shot. Those were the last torpedoes U-530 would ever fire. On May 8th, Germany surrendered unconditionally, and the order from Admiral Dönitz reached every boat still at sea at the highest possible priority. Cease fire, surface, fly a black flag, and sail to the nearest Allied port. It was not ambiguous. Dozens of commanders obeyed it, and others, following a plan called Operation Rainbow, scuttled their boats rather than hand them over. Vermuth did neither. He was roughly 1,000 miles from Puerto Rico when the surrender signal came through, and he made a decision that would follow him for the rest of his life. He did not surrender. He did not scuttle. He turned south, and he started running. Later, he told interrogators he had doubted the message, that he feared it was an Allied trick to lure U-boats to the surface where they could be destroyed. But that explanation has never sat comfortably. The signal was broadcast repeatedly and received clearly right across the Atlantic, and commanders in far worse positions accepted it and complied. What Vermuth actually intended to do for the next 63 days, he never convincingly said. What is certain is what he did to his own boat. Over the following weeks, U-530 became a submarine methodically erasing its own history. The remaining torpedoes went over the side, all but one dead weapon. The code books went into the sea. The logbook, the official record of every course, every order, every position since leaving Norway, was destroyed. The anti-aircraft ammunition was jettisoned. The radar gear, the cryptographic material, even the crew's personal identification papers were thrown overboard. Her deck gun, the kind most boats of her class had already lost by 1943, but which she had oddly carried, was gone as well. By the time she neared Argentina, there was almost nothing left aboard that could tell anyone where she had been. And that is the detail that turns a simple escape into something stranger, because a man merely fleeing a lost war has no reason to destroy every trace of a voyage he could otherwise explain. The route Vermuth admitted to took the boat east of Bermuda, across the equator near the lonely St. Peter and St. Paul rocks, then south through the open Atlantic. Running submerged by day on the snorkel and surfacing only at night, a Type IG-40 could have covered that distance in roughly 60 to 65 days. From leaving the New York area in mid-May to arriving at Mar del Plata on July 10th is about 61 days. The mathematics are tight, but they are not impossible. And that is exactly the problem. The numbers leave almost no time for anything but traveling, which only sharpens the question of why a man with nothing to hide would work so hard to make sure no one could ever check. He had chosen Argentina, he said, believing it was still neutral, apparently unaware that it had declared war on Germany back in March. Then there was the state of the boat herself. According to Argentine naval reports, U-530 arrived in what one account described as a calamitous condition. The hull rusting, the conning tower splitting apart, the casing scarred by traces of a recent fire. Investigators also found that a determined attempt had been made to sabotage her diesel engines. Wormuth first claimed they had simply failed on their own, and only later admitted the damage was deliberate. He had made the boat useless. Whatever U-530 was, and wherever she had been, he had ensured she could never simply be turned around and sailed somewhere else. And one more thing was missing. One of the submarine's inflatable dinghies was gone, and Wormuth could not account for it. There was also the matter of his approach. By his own account, he first sighted the coast, then slipped south to the smaller town of Miramar, and spent an entire day there before turning back north under cover of darkness to surrender at Mar del Plata. He denied firmly that anyone had been put ashore during that unexplained pause. But that missing dinghy sat alongside a stranger detail. Newspaper reports at the time described the commander who surrendered as tall and blonde, while the documented Otto Wormuth was said to be shorter and dark-haired. Years later, researchers comparing photographs argued that the man who brought U-530 into port was not the same Wormuth who had left Norway, and Argentine investigators quietly raised the possibility of a mutiny aboard. None of it was ever confirmed, but no one has ever fully explained who walked off that submarine or what might have left it on the dinghy that never came back. The arrival set off a storm of speculation across two continents. A Brazilian admiral publicly accused U-530 of torpedoing the cruiser Bahia, lost with more than 300 men only days earlier, until an inquiry proved the Bahia had been destroyed by an accidental explosion during her own gunnery drill, and the accusation was quietly dropped. Another officer suggested the boat had somehow come from Japan. Then an Argentine reporter claimed a police report described a submarine offloading high-ranking Germans on the remote Patagonian coast, supposedly Hitler and Eva Braun traveling in disguise. That version collapsed under the evidence because exhaustive investigation established that Hitler had died in Berlin in late April, before U-530 could ever have reached him. The genuine Nazi fugitives who did reach Argentina came later, by ship and by plane, through the escape networks that historians call the rat lines, not by submarine at all. And then, 5 weeks after the first boat appeared, it happened again. On August 17th, a second German submarine, UK 977, surfaced at the very same naval base, having run from Norway on one of the longest submerged voyages in the history of the war. Her commander, Heinz Schaefer, had let 16 married crewmen off in Bergen before turning south, and unlike Wormuth, he arrived with his papers and his logbook intact. He would spend years denying, in interrogation and later in a book, that he had smuggled anyone to safety. But the plain fact of two German submarines slipping into the same Argentine harbor within weeks of each other gave every rumor the fuel it needed. Coincidence began to look, to a great many people, like coordination. What happened next was almost jarringly ordinary. The 54 men of U-530 were brought ashore, given hot food and haircuts, and then placed under guard while Argentine and American officers questioned them for weeks. Eventually, the crew was handed to the United States, held into 1947, and repatriated to Germany, and no one was ever prosecuted for anything beyond the simple failure to obey the surrender order. Otto Wormuth himself lived quietly into old age, gave almost no interviews, and to the end, never fully accounted for those 63 days at sea. Whatever he knew, he chose to keep. And that is where the story is usually allowed to end, with the fantastic answer disproved and everyone relieved to move on. But debunking the escape does nothing to explain the erasure. Even with the Argentine files, the American interrogation transcripts, and decades of later declassified paper, historians can only assemble a plausible account of those 63 days. Never a complete one. The logbook is gone. The men who knew are dead. U-530 herself has been on the ocean floor since 1947, when the American submarine Toro lined her up for target practice and sent her to the bottom. And remember what she actually was: one of only 2 boats that ever surfaced to surrender in Argentina at all. Dozens of U-boats still at sea on the day the war ended scuttled themselves in deep water, and more than 40 were never satisfactorily accounted for at all. Each one carried its own courses, its own cargo, its own reasons for going quiet, and unlike U-530, those boats left no rusting hull in a harbor for anyone to question. U-530 is the one that got caught, and even the one that got caught cannot be fully explained. If the boat that surrendered still hides this much, imagine the ones that never surfaced at all. Subscribe.